everybody's attention in the stands there. I'd like to introduce Stacey Green, yelling Green Tree Branch Morgan. She's going to conduct the clinic, and she'll introduce the ladies that are coming in for the carriage. The plan is to be about 30 minutes. We'll take a break and get some food, and then the reigning hymn will start around the carriage. So I'll turn it over to Stacey, and she'll get us started.
Hi, everybody. I have a couple of gals helping me this afternoon. The first through the gate is Liz Goldman and her horse, Sutton's Dark Twist. She is driving a road cart or a training cart, depending on who's looking at it and what they're going to call it. But that's the general name for that kind of cart. If it had longer shafts, it would be called a stallion cart, because they hitched the stallions up to them and drove them from farm to farm breeding mares. This is Martha Nelson from South Dakota. Liz is from Washington. And both these gals have been driving Carriage for quite a long time. We chose them partly because they have two different types of harnesses. And two different types of carriages. This one is a Meadowbrook. What makes it a Meadowbrook is that you step in from behind, the seats split, and one seat opens up and you step through to sit down on it. You want to? Thanks. That's the way you get into it. Okay? Both carriages have something I think is essential on them, and that's a tug stop. Keeps the tug from moving anywhere on the shaft. It gives you a much cleaner hitch, a much tighter hitch, and it keeps from rubbing the leathers on your shaft, so it's very fun. Let's start with, how many of you have driven? Okay. Do we need to go through parts of the harness and fitting and that kind of stuff? Why it's all here? Let me go through real quickly. We have breast collar. There are collar harnesses and there are breast collar harnesses. I like breast collars so that if my horse changes weight and size, I can change by holes instead of having to get a new collar. Purpose of breast collar and traces is to pull the carriage. Without those, you would not be able to go forward very comfortably. The next thing we come to is the saddle. The purpose of the saddle is to hold the shafts up. These are tugs, and when you talk to old timers, tugs and traces are interchangeable to them. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and ask. You may have to get my attention, but as I get a little focused. This harness has what's called a wrap girth or a wrap strap, which comes up from the bottom, wraps around the shaft, and ties down. The purpose of the girth, of course, is to keep the saddle in place. The purpose of the wrap girth or the over girth, like this one has, you see it goes straight down from the shaft and buckles under the belly, is to keep the shafts from going up in the air. I was talking to Stuart Hazard one time, and he said, well, that old Red Chief was quite a horse. He said, we were going down the hill and my wrap girth broke. He said, those shafts went straight up in the air. And that cart rolled right up on his butt. He said, that horse carried me all the way down that hill. Well, so regardless of one or the other, they each have their purpose. The back strap, which attaches to the crupper, is to keep the saddle in place. When a saddle is set too far forward, you see she's got her saddle set nicely back from this horse's withers. When the back strap is too long, what happens is your saddle ends up right up on the withers, and they begin to get pinched and they begin to get fighty. And that's an unpleasant experience for everybody, the horse especially. These are called bragging loops. They're not especially appropriate in carriage. As a matter of fact, they tried to make them completely illegal. The purpose of a bragging loop was that it showed, because you had all this extra leather, it showed that you had a shorter backed horse than anybody else. And it came from the carriage world. So some of us believe in bragging loops. We think they're a great idea. This is the breeching, it's your brakes. If you live in a hilly area, you want it fastened fairly snugly forward to the carriage to keep the carriage from running up on the horse's hind legs. Anybody have any questions about that? I like my crupper fastened fairly snug because it's a real experience to go down a hill and have that whole thing move forward and suddenly catch the horse under the tail. And they don't like that very much. Where I live now, I have to really, really work to find a hill. I used to live in Colorado and there were lots of hills. So we got real comfortable with that. Rein terrets to guide the reins forward. Neck rings for your reins. If you don't have these, what I have always been taught is to put the rein under the neck strap. The purpose of that is to keep the rein from being loose and getting caught under a shaft. It won't totally prevent it, but it gives you a good start. Bridles, most horses are shown in the show ring. You will not see a driving horse without blinkers, winkers, or blinders. There are specific types of each. These are square. His are D-shaped. They're also hatchet-shaped. And there were certain ones that were for certain types of carriages. I didn't know that. I have to look them up in a book. You want to make sure that your blinders are set so that the horse is at a width that the horse is comfortable with. The scarier the horse, usually the tighter the blinders, although some scary horses like a little more vision, so you widen your blinders. The general rule is the eye needs to be in the middle of the blinder. That's a general rule. I've had horses that have put their heads up and look over the blinders, so I set their eye almost to the very bottom of the blinder. I have had other horses that would duck their heads and look under the blinder, so their eyes get set clear to the top of the blinder. Just because it's a suggestion doesn't mean it's a hard, fast rule. Do what works for your horse. This horse is wearing a Liverpool bit. This is another Liverpool with a slightly arched mouth, and we could go on about bits all night long. I have seen people drive in D-ring snaffles, in loose ring snaffles. Pretty much you can carriage drive in virtually any bit with the exception of wire snaffles. But a slow twist is okay, but not wire bits. So, does anybody have any questions at this point? Wow, I must be really good. Nobody's asking me questions. Yes? The difference between a Liverpool bit and a snaffle, any snaffle is jointed, and it also is, okay, this is a Liverpool snaffle, but what makes it a Liverpool is this type of cheek, where it's got the rings and the slots that go down further. Gives you, it's like a curved bit, gives you a lot more leverage.
Are there any rules about what slot?
In some things, I believe that there are. This is one of the very hardest things about the carriage driving world. In the carriage driving world, there are a lot of things that are. Everybody knows it, except nobody ever wrote it down, and it's not written down in the rule book. It is recommended that you do not drive in the bottom slot, because that shows that you have a very hard to handle horse. However, I've driven in the bottom slot plenty of times. So, you know, you take your, you do what you need to do to drive your horse. First thing there to notice, we have a header here. That's a safety issue. They brought the carriage up, they brought it up with the shafts higher than the hip, so that the horse didn't step sideways and run into a shaft. The tugs and the shafts, you notice that it came right to the tug stop. I like this kind of tug stop because it's got 3 settings. So if you have a horse that's a little longer, a little shorter, you can make a change. If you are going to change it, make sure you have your nail polisher Loctite handy. All these pieces are replaceable, but it's a real pain in the neck. The next piece we have, first thing they fastened was the traces. You really don't know where anything else is going to fasten until your traces are fastened. It all depends on who it is, how they do it. I bring my trace up, and you always, on the first, you include your on the first wrap, you include your trace, go around just the shaft after that, and then buckle back down. And that puts your trace in a Y, which means that it is captured so it's not going to slap the horse, catch on something. Hopefully, you're going to hitch snugly enough that you're not going to have big gaps in your traces. I always wrap behind first. And the reason I always wrap behind first is because I want to pull things forward. That's okay. You do it the way you do it. That's fine. And you notice she snugged it down. What she's doing is she's pulling those shafts down to the horse's side. So as the horse goes around the corner, she doesn't have to worry about that cart coming around and slapping the horse. That can be a pretty ugly experience. I've seen people that drove with real loose shafts, and the horse, really tolerant horse, I was really impressed. Because that shaft came around and slapped that horse in the side, and she just kept going on. She never fussed with it. You notice also that this shaft is in direct line with the trace. As the trace comes off the chest, it is set to a height so that it is right in line. The trace and the shaft are in the same line. And that's done for a number of reasons. One is the draft, so that it pulls easily, and the other is good looks. I always like good looks. Everything about Carriage is supposed to be partially about elegance and tradition. Then she went ahead and fastened her breeching. You notice there's a loop on the bottom of the shaft. That loop is called a footman's loop. It comes in many varieties. Some are just a little loop like this. Some are a triangle looking thing. There are just all different kinds of them. Same thing with the way you attach your trace to your single tree. So we have this horse virtually ready to go. She likes fairly loose breeching. I like mine a little snugger than that. But again, it's up to you, your horse, how things go. This horse's barn name is Higgins, so we'll call him that. And you notice his breeching is quite loose. This horse goes well that way, he's comfortable that way, he works well that way. And you notice that our hitter hasn't moved while our driver is getting into the carriage. She gets seated as quickly as possible.